Crystal Joy Hardman. I am an actress, writer, and multimedia artist. Before we kind of go ahead and get in these questions, I'm going to introduce the panelists. We're going to start on this end and then work our way back. Is there a mic over there? Or do y'all just talk in that?
I think we just
Okay,
talk to God.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, okay.
You
I am.
yeah.
I don't know if you were going to introduce me. I had to do it myself. Okay, let me see. I am Chris St. Martin. I make various forms of art. I was trained in filmmaking by a guerrilla filmmaker by the name of Ron Pitts, who worked with Andy Warhol and all types of folk. And he did, what did he do? I'm going to use his accomplishments to talk about mine. So, Ron was awesome. He passed away. And yeah, Ron told me, hey, you can just make a movie with whatever you got. So that's how I live life.
Nice.
All right, hey everyone, my name is Colette Gunim, and I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I also run a nonprofit called Mezcla Media Collective, which works to support specifically women and non-binary filmmakers of color in Chicago. So those are the main two things. I'm currently working on my first feature-length film, which maybe we'll discuss more as the night goes on. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sam or Samantha George. I am a creative producer and production designer. I've been lucky to have kind of an eclectic resume as far as doing shorts, commercial work, features, independent features, television, and working in both art department and the production side. I'm also, more of a hobbyist artist, but yeah, that's kind of my spiel.
Very nice. So we're going to kind of get into the short story section or portion of this questionnaire first. My first question is, how has Chicago inspired your work as a writer, and how has the city influenced your approach to storytelling? We'll start with you, Sam.
Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah, I mean, I'm from Indiana. You might hear a little bit of an accent. I don't know where it comes from. But I moved here probably 6 or 7 years ago. And it was definitely a culture shock for me because I'm used to soybeans and cornfields, and y'all have public transportation here. And one of the things that really impressed me and I think has inspired me as far as an artist, producer, just creative, is just the fact that everyone does work so hard here, but there's such a strong community and support. Maybe not always necessarily financially, but there is a support to see more art here. And to find those people who also are artists to come together and kind of collaborate, I think that's incredibly inspiring. So for me, it's really the people and the drive here that has inspired me and kind of kept me in Chicago.
Nice, very nice.
Literally exact. Yes, that this is such an amazing place to be to create art because there's this deep camaraderie and wanting everyone to elevate one another versus, I don't know, New York and LA, I think there's a lot of versus competition. And so that has been so informative for my own process to make sure that I'm bringing people in to my work and allowing people to, however I can help elevate the next, PA, that kind of thing, to get into their own roles. It's just, I've learned so much and I'm hoping to pay it forward in that same way.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to piggyback off of what they said. I'm also from Indiana. No, I'm not. I'm not from Indiana. But I grew up here, and I think that everyone has a story to tell, and we don't really have to look too far to figure out what those stories are. First, you start with your own story, and then you think about the story of the communities that you work with. So that's how I operate.
And
Oh, sorry. No, I was just going to interject because you said something really beautiful about everybody having their own story to tell. And I know for me, even at 30 years old, I've been so gun shy about my own personal stories. I'm used to bringing everybody else's. So now I'm kind of stepping into my own, my own creative work and trying to support it. And I have found so many people who are supportive of that and want to see me achieve and are giving me resources or really good feedback. And my my first fear about sharing my work is man, everyone's just I'm too sensitive for this world. I am just too soft. I'm just gonna get ripped to shreds. But that's not the case at all. There are so many people who want to help and want to see you grow and want to support your work because they do believe that everybody has a story, that the few people you meet that maybe are kind of don't want to work with, it doesn't matter because you meet so many more who in some way help you kind of find your voice.
This kind of leads into the next question, and I'm going to start with you, Chris. Can you share any personal experiences or encounters in Chicago that has inspired a story or character in your writing?
Yeah. I was talking with my son about it the other day, which makes me an old person. I was talking to my grandson. I was talking to my son about our neighbor. I will not name him, but he was a character, you know. So you don't really have to look too far to find someone to either be inspired by, whatever the case may be. You know, every day was an adventure with this person. So I was just like, should I make a movie about this guy? I was just like, man, you know, we're gonna need special effects. I don't know, but I'm turning it into a play.
Oh wow.
Like a very short play based off a few things that we talked about. And, just call it a day. So yeah, shout out to the next door neighbor. But that's not the name of it. But that's a nice one. I mean, it could work.
That's awesome. Yeah, since I'm in the documentary space, you know, I'm following real people also. So it's definitely been an exciting experience to be able to get to meet people through the lens of documentary filmmaking, and I would have to take it back though, because I'm working on this feature-length film about my family, that my parents have been the one that have really informed my work, and wanting to make sure that I honor their legacy through this film and making sure that I'm able to tell their story authentically. And there's just so much in like the personal documentary space around ethics and making sure that you're able to do that for your family. So yeah, I think that would be mine.
God, that's a tough question. It's tough because you do want to write not only from personal experience, but maybe other people's experiences, or you get inspired by other people that you have met, and I can only speak from, 4 instances, but I can't speak too much on it because it's a little confidential. But there's this short documentary piece that I did on this guy who owns this coffee shop company. Like he just started about a year ago. And he, before that, worked 10 years at an ad agency. But his story is really unique because before that, he was in prison. And you would think somebody who works for this ad agency wouldn't be, like, there'd be a lot of road barriers to be able to work at, like, an ad agency and open his own coffee shop. He immigrated over from another country. Like you're saying, your next door neighbor, your family, like these stories, you have no idea, not even necessarily what someone has gone through, but what their story is that might spark an idea that, okay, maybe I'm not doing a documentary from you, but you've inspired me to make a character about you. You've inspired me to take this little bit of your life that I see and maybe build off of it and build a world off of it. Like, I'm working on a short animated piece right now that very, very loosely is inspired by something that my grandma used to do with me, which always when I was younger, she would point up at like planes in the sky and tell me they were UFOs. Like we'd go out and go UFO hunting. Oh, wow. And I always thought when she passed, I was like, maybe she didn't die. Maybe she just got abducted back to her home planet. So now I'm just following this really kind of quirky story.
Oh, I love that.
Of a grandmother and her granddaughter and trying to take her back to her home planet and seeing what that would look like. So it's interesting the people you might meet along the way, how that inspires you and informs you to whatever that story is. So, I'm not saying be friends with everybody, but it's worth hearing some people out.
People are interesting.
They are interesting.
Oh my
People
gosh.
are interesting. They're layered. They're complex, just like ourselves.
They're layered.
And I just love what you said, Chris, when you were just like, start with yourself first. And it's so true.
Yeah.
I look at a lot of my work, and I've started with me. And I'm like, you know what? I am my best muse.
Yes.
Yeah.
If I ever feel lost on who to write about or what to write about, I always just look in the mirror.
Yeah.
I can never find a character to identify with when I watch TV.
Yeah.
So I stopped watching TV. I was just like, where am I? I have to write myself in. So I borrowed this from somebody else. So somebody talked about, hey, you have to write yourself in.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, that's incredible. Because I think you actually told me too that like one of the things is that you told me you have to write for yourself. So even if you're not writing yourself in, you have to write what is you want to see.
That's true.
Because you're gonna wait on everybody else to do it rather than just like you have no idea where what you do might inspire somebody else. Someone might love it. Someone might want to, make it into a show, a movie, whatever. But even if they don't, at the end of the day, at least you explored something that you haven't, that you needed to get out, that you want to see.
So true. I was listening to, I think it was Rick Rubin, and he always, he gives like the best creative advice, but he was just saying how, if you don't see it, then write it. And I've heard a lot of artists say that, I mean, I can't, right now I'm kind of tired of watching TV and streaming stuff because it's like, sometimes I feel a little bored. You know, you know, and that's not shade to anyone else, but it's like you said, like I don't see myself, I don't see my experiences, I don't see this reflection of myself, you know. So yeah, I definitely agree. So, what challenges have you faced when writing about Chicago, and how have you overcome them? I'll start with you, Sam.
Permits. Like you can't really write in like the CTA and then expect to get a CTA shot because like the permits are wild. So a lot of guerrilla filmmaking, as you two know from our last short we did together. I mean, honestly, that's been the biggest thing, is having this idea and this version of like wanting to showcase Chicago in its authenticity, the experience you have, everything from, you know, the train going by to people on the street to cool signs, and then you remember, ooh, there's legal stuff in the way. Like I have to get permits for this, I have to get clearance for this. Like, so how can you be creative to shoot around that, or take that again as inspiration and use it differently? Because that has been the biggest struggle, you know, as far as like wanting to shoot Chicago authentically, is like you don't always have the money or the security or the permission to do these things. So you make a decision. You either get it run and gun guerrilla filmmaking and then hope that nobody knocks on your door being like, you owe us money for this, or you think of a different creative solution to now, okay, how can I use this, what is it that I really like about this, and can I do something different? Or, you know, how many art friends do I have that can just like make me a, you know, train logo, slap it on the train, and then we'll pull it off when we're done. You know, that's the part of that has been probably the most difficult, is like how can I make this feel like authentically Chicago and tell the story of a city I'm proud to be in, when there's some limitations, there's some restrictions.
Yeah.
It's big. It's big. Yeah, I think on the authenticity angle is that, just as we were saying, that how complex characters are, also the city is so complex too. And how do you show it authentically when there are so many layers of it, and you only have whatever 5 minutes to be able to have a scene to like show the complexity of Chicago. So in my film, I talk about my love of Pilsen, and that I stayed in Pilsen for a long time. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like how do I encapsulate like the richness and the layers of Pilsen in this like 3-minute scene? And so I was like, I want to go beyond just like the murals and you know, the paletero, that kind of thing. So it was tough to try to figure out how can I add that. And I think my way of doing it was being able to use my voice and adding narration. Yes, going back to me and my experience with the interaction, and that would allow it to have that like unique perspective in there. So
I love Pilsen. Pilsen is so good.
Pilsen's amazing. Y'all got my favorite museum there.
Yes, I go there a lot. Pilsen's is honestly one of my favorite like neighborhoods in Chicago. It's such like
so
a
much
rich,
soul.
it's so much soul, so much soul.
I mean, Pilsen's the best. I lived there for about 7 years.
Oh wow! All right,
A couple different places. I have yet to make the story about the place that I lived that was kind of off the chain. I guess I can make that into a film. It's a lot, you know. There's a lot of people who be offended by that film, you know. And you know, it's a lot of gentrification.
Absolutely.
And sometimes I stop going to Pilsen because of the gentrification. First of all, you know, we can go down the list of things, but Chicago is that way, you know. From someone who's lived here for many years, I got a couple gray hairs. You watch it change. You know, let me backtrack a little bit. I used to go to a club when I was about 17 in Wicker Park. You know, people used to come there to break dance.
Oh, nice.
That's cool.
I don't go down that street too often, but when I do, I turn my music all the way up, and I want people to hear what this neighborhood used to sound like. It's sort of sad. But, you know, there's a Target over there, you know, like, you know what, I could jump out and go get some coffee real fast, you know. So you think about the pros and cons or whatever. So, you know, I love this city, but, you know, I think that everyone in this country and around the world has a gentrification story to tell, you know. Especially as a DIY artist, you know, you watch things change and things like that. So, you know, so there's some backtracking I think that has to happen when you think about communities and representation and like the culture that you belong to. Right down the street from me, someone opened up a gallery. You know, it's like a DIY kind of space. I'm like, you know, kudos to them. You know, hang on to it as long as you can. You know, I hope that your building doesn't get sold. You know, whatever the case may be. You know, so.
It's interesting because it's like I travel a lot, or I would leave Chicago a lot, and when I would come back, it's always felt like sometimes a different city because they're building and all this construction, and sometimes you feel like they're kind of taking away pieces of Chicago or taking away from maybe what it used to be. I mean, change is going to happen, but sometimes just like, can't you just leave this part alone? Like, let it be whatever it is, you know?
Like Pilsen.
Yeah.
Just
Yep,
leave
yep,
Pilsen
yep,
alone.
yep,
You know,
yep.
let it be what it is. It's a beautiful place. You know, support it, but don't go and build like a
Right, these fancy townhomes.
fancy place. When I saw a Tesla there, I was just like,
I know things are changing.
somebody just parked their Tesla there. I was like, all right, get it. I was just like, come on, man, take the hubcaps off.
Let it look really authentic.
I mean, hey.
So the last question around short stories is, Chicago is a city that is always in the news for, unfortunately, gun violence. How do you think the current social and political climate of Chicago is reflected in contemporary short fiction, and do you agree with it?
Damn.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of the independent work that's coming out of Chicago is really pushing back against these tropes, and that
Yeah.
like there's some incredibly
Yeah.
nuanced stories that have nothing to do with like violence and all of this kind of stereotypes about Chicago that gives me hope that we are able to combat with other stories that are authentic as well. So at least, within my collective from Mezcla, that it's amazing to see the work that's coming out of there, that, it touches on these things, but not in this way of like the news where,
It's not sensationalized.
right, that's
Yeah.
exploiting these stories, but making it much more human. So it gives me hope for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I know for me, so I used to live in New York City, and I remember there was a point where I was sitting at work. I was working this day job, and I kid you not, it was like almost every week there was a story about Chicago and
Hey.
the summer, because that's when violence would go up, and it would kind of bother me because people would be like, is it really like that? And they kept calling it Chirac, and I'm like, I actually don't like that. I didn't really like it because I'm like, I'm from there and I know it a little bit differently.
Yep.
And so it would kind of break my heart because I think it kind of would take away from the historical aspects and the beauty of
Totally.
the city. And so there was a point where I wrote a project, The Woe Chronicles, which you guys, Sam and Chris are on. And originally it was actually about this person coming back to Chicago and seeing all the changes. I mean, it turned into something else, but it kind of goes back to how you can use yourself, you can use your environment as a story,
That's right.
as a foundation for something.
Yeah, I mean, there's really nothing more I can add than what Colette had said. Like, similarly to you, except not in New York, so not statewide, but when I went over to Berlin, I was talking to this gentleman. He's like, oh, where are you from? I was like, oh, Chicago. He's like, oh, bang, bang. And I was like, oh.
Are you serious?
No. Yeah, and I was just like, I don't know how to. That's just a
so
stereotype.
sad.
And it's like, you could try and have a dialogue with him, but one, there's a language barrier, and two, it's just like, is it worth it? But similar to what you said, there is a lot of independent content that is using Chicago, of course, as a character, but not falling into those stereotypes of fixating on one thing, like gun violence. I think the more I've seen that, usually, it, again, just from my experience, has been more in like music videos, people like telling their experience or growing up in certain suburbs. But when it comes to independent media, as far as like short films, I haven't seen a lot of that. I mean, you're going to still get stories of that, but a lot of it has been like, how can we use Chicago as an inspiration and these characters going through other facets? Because people are tired of seeing it. They're tired of telling that story. They're tired of being part of that story. They want to see something new. So I'm optimistic that we're moving away from that. You're always still going to have the people who fall into stereotypes, but we are moving away from it. There is more interesting content coming out of Chicago.
Yeah.
I think one thing I'd like to add about that too is that it's also very important about who's telling this story, and that I think that there are more diverse voices that are coming from these communities that are able to speak in a place of authenticity, and that they're using film as a way to have it be a tool of healing versus oh, look at this terrible place, that it's like, this place is beautiful, and it has its issues, and like talking about their own experiences that
Yeah.
it's a very important angle that I feel like has also been missing for
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah.
Literally,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Really, truly.
Well, it's a touchy subject.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a touchy subject. So, I mean, ultimately, I could just borrow from what they've said over and over again because, hey,
Yeah.
we're all on the same page. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, as people who are from Chicago, live in Chicago, surrounding areas, so on and so forth, I mean, it's in the news, but, one of the best classes I took in college years ago, shout out to Columbia College, was like media analysis.
Yeah.
And why things are portrayed the way that they're portrayed. And, there's like political motivation behind it all.
Yeah.
Depending on who you're having a conversation with, you'll hear some very interesting things. I mean, one of the first places that I went to go work was on Chicago's West Side. I still work on the West Side, I don't hear gunshots all the time.
Yeah.
It's a difference, It's like from how you want to portray a particular place for whatever type of political motivation
Yeah.
a person may have. Well, what's that motivation? We could theorize, we can pull something directly from a textbook. Well, if you make it seem dangerous, whatever the case may be, maybe you'll drop the property value.
Yeah.
Get that gentrification thing popping, just
Yeah.
like I'm going to make people afraid of being in a particular place. The list kind of just goes on, and the intricacies of how portrayals
Yeah.
happen, which is more of a reason for us to, as independent filmmakers, to portray things the way that we know them to be.
Yeah. I'll say building off of that, one thing that I know would help is if there was more, but more, not even necessarily fact checking, but getting more eyes on your work to get that critique. So that way you're not falling into these pitfalls of stereotypes, because you might be trying to tell a story but having trouble getting, like, maybe wanting to just tell one facet of Chicago, but then somehow now you've leaned too heavy into it, and you might have tunnel vision so you don't see that right away. Or kind of a similar vein but different example, not necessarily Chicago. Being a woman, I get a lot of men who bring me scripts about abortions. And they have written it because they're like, oh, my sister went through this, or my wife went through this. And it's like, I don't necessarily think it's wrong for men to write about a woman's experience. What I think the problem is when you haven't gotten a woman's point of view on it. And I don't mean just like, interviewing a woman and being like, so what was your experience like? I mean, I have her read it, have them talk about it with you, and kind of sit there with the criticism and really be open to what they're saying. And I think it's the same thing if you're going to use Chicago as a backdrop, as a character, setting, or whatever. If you have a specific part of Chicago you want to show or characteristic, it's important to maybe get more eyes on that piece, so you're getting more feedback to see if that's even coming through.
Yeah.
Instead of just your own circle.
Yeah. Good point. Good points, guys. So we're going to go into locations. So there are so many dope locations here in the city. I've had the pleasure, as I've said, to work with Sam as a director on one of them, and Christy Pettit, and we shot at some really cool locations. For your projects, how do you go about scouting for locations in Chicago, and what factors do you consider when selecting a location for a project?
So I think first, before anything, is really breaking down that script and being like, what are the non-negotiables of my location? And have I been to a location that fits this? And if not, I'll ask around. I'll make a list of like, I need these places with these things, and everything else I'll figure out. But like, the biggest factor is, why is this location important to the script? Like, what are those things? Does it need to be a wooden floor versus a non-wooden floor? Does it need to be a loft space versus, someone's apartment? Like that, especially as a production designer, the location is as much as a character and personality as the rest of the film.
Yes, so true.
So it's doing these breakdowns and really assessing what are my non-negotiables, what does this space need, and then selfishly talking with the rest of my crew, and then being like, all right, DP, what is it that you need from your side of things? Like, it's beyond just logistics, which I'm sure we can get to in a minute. As far as creative goes, like, what is the personality of the space? That is the first question I'm always asking myself, and why is it important?
Yeah.
So when it comes to like scouting these locations, I at least have that list of things that I know, like, this is what I want and this is what I need. And then of course, logistically, depending on how big or small the short is, like, okay, what is loading gonna be like? What's parking gonna be like? We're shooting at what time of day? Oh, there's trees in the way. You know, do I have enough money for an actual G&E team, or is it gonna be someone who's coming in with a light and like flagging certain things? Like, you know, can we have food here? Can we not? How easy accessible is it to public transportation? Because realistically, you're shooting a short film. Maybe not everyone has a car. Maybe you can't shuttle everybody here. So now it's like, okay, if they're taking the train, how far away is it? So I've got my creative questions, my logistic questions, and you know, I can start out with this idea of what I want and a mood board of what I want, but those questions and the answer to those questions are super important to move forward.
Yeah.
Wow, I think I'm gonna leave that. That was comprehensive. And also, I think because I'm in the documentary space, it's different. So I'm gonna leave. If it's okay, I'm gonna let Grace go.
That's fantastic.
That was a great response.
I think that wherever you are is where the film is. So, you know, I was thinking about this, you know, what's my favorite neighborhood to shoot in?
Yeah.
That changes all the time. You know? I mean, I do have my favorites, but I don't really want to give those out. It's just like, I've never seen a film shot in this neighborhood before.
Yeah.
Note to self, you know. But I was driving through the West Loop, and I'm always like talking about what the West Loop used to look like and how it used to be dangerous and, you know, all these types of things. And I remember as a little kid telling my mom, hey, I want to have a loft over here, after I saw Quicksilver with Kevin Bacon. You know, I was just like, I want to be able to ride my bike inside the house. And it's just like, well, they were cheap back then, you know. Nobody wanted to live over there. I think that was in the South Loop anyway. So anyway, West Loop is what it is, but you have to be wherever you are. If your character lives in the West Loop, that's where your film is.
Yeah.
Right? Like, don't, you know, make too much of a fuss about the location, you know. I mean, as the technology changes and you're allowed to be able to just, you know, use what's in your pocket to make a film, pull that bad boy out of there, get to shooting, call it a day.
Yeah. Nice. Can you guys share any particular locations in Chicago that you have found inspiring or unique for your creative projects? I'm actually gonna answer this question too. If you, yeah, so there's a place right next to the cultural center downtown, and it's underground. It's the Metro, and it's got all of these cool lights, and the path just kind of curves. It is such a it's so dope underneath. Like those underground spots, I really like.
No doubt about it. Wow.
And speakeasies.
Speaking.
Something about this, like Chicago has some beautiful speakeasies. Like I've never filmed, but I would love to.
Yeah.
Really
awesome.
nice spaces. Yeah.
I recently filmed at the Humboldt Park Lagoon, and I had
God.
I had never been there before, which I'm like, oh my gosh, like there's so much nature in Humboldt Park that I had no idea. It's so
there's tons.
beautiful, and a lot of like for the doc that I'm doing a lot of like self-reflection, abstract, lyrical pieces, and so being in that nature in Chicago was amazing to like get to explore that area. So that was super inspiring to see. This like little pocket of nature in the middle of the city.
If you like nature, check out the Garfield Conservatory.
Oh yes.
It's beautiful.
Have you
yes,
been
I feel like
It's
I've been
very
baby.
beautiful.
Yes.
If you
It's
haven't,
like
you need to
west.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Right off of,
Okay.
Lake
It's a
Street.
threat at this
Yep.
point.
Wow. All right.
It's amazing.
Well, that's on the
Nice.
list. That's awesome.
I think I have two. One, this is more of just in general locations versus like one specific, and the other one's more specific. But it's so funny how like I've used Peerspace or just asking friends, and how many people's homes like I would not expect to be in Chicago. Like I'll be going in, I'll be like, yeah, I need like a mid-century modern, big windows, like, you know, Frank Lloyd Wright-ish, and I'm expecting that in the suburbs. And my friend's like, yeah, I got you. My friend lives off like in Palmer Square, and I'm like, okay. You go in there, you're like, what house is this? Like it's incredible. These facades that you walk by every day that you don't notice until you ask somebody, and they lead you to this place that you never would have thought otherwise. You know, and it's funny because my boyfriend currently just got back from a location scout, and you know, originally before he went in there, and I was supposed to go with him, but you know, the time conflicted. So I like sent him with the list of questions, and he's like, I just don't think it's gonna work, and it's too much money, da 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 da. And he calls me on the ride over, and I was almost late to coming in here because he's like, Sammy, it's great. I had no idea this was here, and just like he's telling me all these things, and it's like it's not even so much about doing the research, but it kind of goes back to like, okay, what are your non-negotiables? What do you really need? go see a space, see what's there, and then make the judgment if it fits or not. Don't try and judge it by just some like few photos someone can put on a computer.
Yeah.
You know? And then my other one this was actually when I was on The Shy and I was a prop master and we were doing it overnight and it was a terrible day. Like they were making us work through Memorial Day weekend. I feel like I'm shit talking. I'm really sorry. They were making us work through a holiday weekend, and I ended up sending my whole like props team home because I was like, this is ridiculous. It's raining, so I tried to order pizza for my team and have it delivered to our little prop truck. So I'm like, it'll be fun. Pizza never got there, so we had to go walk and get it anyway. But it was an overnight, and I sent everybody home, and I was just so mad because I'm like, I was getting mad at the city. I was like mad that it took this much effort and work. We're in the rain. It's the Midwest. I want to go home. I'm on this show. I'm exhausted. And there's this moment where everybody's going home and we're packing up and the sun is coming up and like no one's in the city yet. And I'm just in this park by myself and it's super quiet. And so I'm like getting my phone out and like it's not a short film that I'm filming. It's not The Shy that, you know, is going to be used as like B-roll or something. But it's a really beautiful moment where like, again, you forget with the hustle and bustle to take a moment, pause, and really look at where you're at. And it was gorgeous with the sun rising, everything still, and I'm like, I could actually sit here for a while and enjoy myself.
Wow.
So I think that was one of my favorite locations because just like everything kind of evened itself out after a stressful day. And it's just, it's, you know, again, it goes to show you like, take a minute, don't get caught up in any of the stress and really kind of venture out lower your expectations in a sense, you know. At some point, just surrender to the fact of like, there's nothing you can do about it or your idea of this perfect, what it's supposed to be, like you said, work with the space, like, it was great because in that moment you're like, I'm fine.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, as long as you film it, I mean, it's great. I mean, the city is just beautiful and horrible at the same time. So
You said beautiful and horrible.
yeah, I mean, you can find just about any and everything. It's just like anything, in
Dilapidation.
between. You got your dilapidation. You got your high rises. I mean, I used to shoot photographs downtown for years. You know? It was my thing to do. Downtown wasn't as crowded back then. There was less tourists. But then once tourists thought that I was going to put my camera down and like rob them, I was just like, you know, I'm not going to come downtown to shoot photographs anymore. This is troubling. I'm going to the suburbs. No, I'm joking. But for my feature film, I went and I said, I can't make a feature film without shooting some downtown buildings. You know? I love the way that the architecture is compared to other places, you know. So I mean, I got like tons of B-roll of just like downtown, you know. So any and everywhere is great to shoot.
It is. Chicago has some really nice art deco spots. Like if you go to Union Station, like the Grand Central Station, and you look, it looks, sometimes you feel like, is this Chicago? Is this Europe? Because of like how some of the architecture is. I did a boat tour this past summer and Chicago looks really different from the water.
Oh yeah.
It looks completely different. And when you're passing like that bridge where I think it's like the no, it's like right by like the Trump Towers. When you look behind, it just looks like a different, it's so beautiful.
It is beautiful, yeah.
It's really beautiful. So what I love about Chicago is the Art Deco.
Yeah.
It has such a nice vibe to it.
Big time.
Really nice vibe. Okay, so the next question. Okay, so Chicago is a city that is continuously expanding. How do you stay up to date on the new construction and attractions and developments in the city?
Follow the Teslas.
Jeez.
Wherever there's a Tesla,
Where there's a Tesla, there's something nice.
something's happening over there. I don't know if it's nice, quote unquote, but something's happening. You know?
I was about to say, I feel like sometimes it just slaps you in the face and be like, that was new. Honestly, I keep up with a lot of like Block Club Chicago and like, you know, outlets like that, kind of more independent media. And just even like smaller Instagram accounts that like aren't necessarily as influencery as far as like the top 3 spots in Chicago to get ramen. Like there's a couple of like smaller creators that I do follow as far as like trying to get who really want to showcase a different side of Chicago that you don't see.
Yeah.
So I'd say as far as like keeping up with things that are ever changing, those would be you know, independent media individuals are the people who I follow to get that. Because otherwise I'm just driving along and I'm like, well, you know, since the pandemic, everything is gone and things have changed. So it's like, if I'm not driving along being like, wait, what happened to that?
Yeah.
You know, then it's like getting news from from other people, honestly.
Yes, I was gonna say, I think it's mostly like word of mouth and just like conversations that like in
Yeah.
our community that we're like, oh wow, what did you hear about this development, that kind of thing, that a lot
Yeah.
of it is through conversations.
Yeah, same, same.
I literally just follow the Teslas.
So you were serious.
I mean, you know, when I saw a Tesla in Pilsen, I was just like, oh, gentrification is about to go down.
Yeah,
Hardcore.
not wrong.
So just take a look. I was driving through the West Loop earlier, and a lady had like the suicide doors, Tesla, whatever. There's a butterfly door.
DeLorean?
Butterfly
That's like a
door.
real.
It's a thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a thing.
butterfly doors.
I was just
Wow, I
like,
didn't know that.
well, you know, it's just like wherever she came out of costs a lot of money. Or
Millions.
it's a little bit more expensive. Maybe I'll go in there, maybe not. You know,
Yeah.
but it's just a matter of construction. I don't know. I mean, will you be able to shoot in Chicago in the next few years without a permit? That's the question. You know.
Yeah.
Will there be so much construction that it no longer looks the same? Or will you need to go to some other city to pretend it's Chicago?
Yeah.
That's scary.
Because that does happen.
That does happen, yeah.
Yeah.
You kind of are kind of going into this next question is what challenges have you faced when scouting for locations and how have you overcome them? You kind of brief touch on it a little bit, Sam, with like the permits and the
Weather.
Oh my God, weather.
Weather.
Oh, let's not even
Weather,
is a
weather,
whole
availability,
conversation.
permits, the size of the crew,
Yes,
like
yes.
budget.
Yes.
I feel like, I will say, I feel like at some point, regardless of your wish list, regardless of your non-negotiable, well, I mean, no, keep your non-negotiables in mind, but regardless of your wish list, at some point you have to get to the point where you're like, this space is the space.
Yeah.
And you will figure out how to make it work. Because nothing is ever going to be 100% ideal. You know, because even sound stages are, I mean, they're great, but they're not 100% ideal in the sense of like, you know, some PA's going to mess something up and then like yell in the middle of a take. But like, you know, you will end up figuring out how to make a space work for you. So all the other challenges, like it will be weather, it'll be permits, it'll be budget, but you just have to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah.
You know, and hopefully you have a team with you who is understanding to that. You know, it's not like you're asking a bunch of people for favors, but they're as passionate to see you succeed as you are,
Yeah.
wanting to not exhaust them, but also collaborate on a really beautiful project together.
Yeah. So true.
Weather. I think that's literally been the biggest thing, is just like, I filmed so much in the winter. I don't know why we always choose the winter. I just feel like everything I've done has been like frigid, ice cold all the time. And like figuring out how to make this work for hours on end when you have to be outdoors. It's no joke.
It is. Chicago
it is no
has
joke.
those bitter.
It's
This
so
winter was pretty
Yeah, this was great.
mild.
No,
This
see,
is
now
great.
y'all jinxed it, and I'm telling you, next week we're gonna be like
Sorry.
-16 and like ice raining from the sky.
Right.
No,
Sorry.
Snow.
Excuse me.
to your point, it's wild because there is a feature that I was on, and I know we're talking about short films, but it was a documentary, but they needed a flashback scene, so it was kind of shooting the short film within the scene or this feature. But the documentary in the flashback was supposed to take place in 1950s Honduras, but they shot it in Chicago
Oh, wow.
in January
Oh my god.
during an ice storm.
Okay.
And they wanted to know, like, hey, what can we do about all this ice?
What
Blow on it? Like, I don't.
are you supposed to?
Get you
Exactly.
like flamethrowers.
It's an
Yeah,
ice storm.
I mean, we had PAs out there like raking stuff,
Oh
and there's like
my
icebergs in
God.
like Lake Michigan just floating, and I'm just like, I don't know what you want me to do.
Oh my
But again, it comes back to like, we're gonna be in this cold weather. There's nothing we can do about it. We have to
Yeah,
make this work.
yeah.
So now creatively, we have to shoot around these roadblocks. So that's, hopefully you have a good dialogue with your DP or yourself if you're the one doing it, and you don't put so much pressure on yourself to, again, these expectations like, it has to look like this. Surrender, breathe a little bit, and just think about how can you work with what you're given,
Yeah.
and shoot around these. Like I've seen a little bit of the footage, and like, I'm not saying it looked like 1950s Honduras, but I am saying it didn't look like Chicago in January. So
Okay,
like a happy
okay.
medium,
Okay.
you know,
So you met some kind of goal.
something was met.
Did you have something to add?
Oh God, man, I am so lost right now.
That's okay. We can just go to.
Having a good time. Though.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. That's all that matters right now.
Oh man, challenges, they're everywhere. But, you know,
Yeah.
we keep coming back to the idea that you work with what you have.
Yeah.
And no place is perfect, but you'll find some perfection there. You know?
Yes.
So,
Totally.
I
a good
recently
point.
did an online project called the Mood Collection, and it was literally just a wall that I filmed 5 visualizers on, and I'm thinking to myself, like, how am I going to make this look different in every single video? And you literally, that's when like the best spurts of creativity comes, is when you're forced to work with your limitations, and you're actually forced to collaborate with your limitations, like versus trying to fight against them. And so it was honestly like one of my favorite projects that I did, because it helped me to expand outside of what I thought was working against me. So when it comes to locations, it's like you work with what you have, you do your best, and that's just it.
that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know. So yeah. So we're not going to go into budgets.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you write your project, at what point do you factor in the budget? Because, you know, some people think about their budget while they're writing.
Yes. Yes.
At what point do you start to think about that?
I mean, I do that now. When I first started writing, I was just like, okay, explosions, UFOs. Comet comes to the door, Bruce Willis. You know, and then you realize, like, oh, this is going to cost millions of dollars. So what? It's going to happen. Keep going, and that's good.
Yeah.
And you learn a lot from that. And you're just shopping that script around for 10 years, and you're like, I went to Bruce Willis's house and I tried to put this on his doorstep, you know, all that kind of thing. And then that's your film. But anyway, we'll back up a little bit. Now I think about, all right, well, how much money do I have? What type of equipment am I using? What's the budget look like? I like to start with no money. It's fun that way.
It is. It is fun, because the project that I was talking about, there was no budget.
Yeah.
You know, I filmed it in my family member's house against a closet wall and just put a sheet up. There was no money for that. I literally just used what I had. That's
Yeah, and it worked.
It worked, because that's
Like,
all that you
made it
have
happen.
sometimes.
Yes, yes. And
That's
it's not
it.
going to keep you from making your content. Yeah.
Exactly, because
Yeah.
otherwise it'll be 5 years
Yeah.
later and you still haven't made the thing you've been talking about
Yes.
making.
That's
You know, I
It's
think
true.
as far as budgets go, it's hard because I hate to admit, like, I'm always thinking about the budget, and like sometimes I'll get too much in a mode of like, this isn't realistic, Samantha, like, and talk myself out of something. And I'm getting to the point, kind of basically to what Chris said, where I'm writing almost all my dream like wish list, how I want it to be, and then I start taking away things where I know this probably isn't feasible, so how can I rework it to what is feasible? So I think it's more of a secondary stage. Or if I know an idea at this moment is one I really want to make, but it's just not, you know, the demands of it just aren't feasible right now, then I'll think like, is there another way I can do it? So an instance, instead of live action, I've got a friend of mine who uses Unreal Engine, which if no one knows what Unreal Engine is, you make video games with it. But he's been making animated short content. He taught himself.
Wow.
And so we were talking about short stories, and he's like, I really like this idea that you have. Have you thought about animating it? And I was like, well, no, I didn't think that was a possibility at all. And so now I'm like, okay, I can now take this budget that's supposed to be like huge, and if I make the script smaller, and I make the budget smaller, I can actually animate this thing. And like, there's still some creative decisions that have to be made, because it's probably not gonna look like a Pixar movie.
Yeah.
But it can come pretty close to being something that's enjoyable and entertaining. And I'm not saying everybody like go find a friend with Unreal Engine, or do. But it's interesting, like, okay, if you have this idea that maybe live action you can't do, because there's a lot more to making something live action than I think we realize. How else can you do it?
Yeah.
Can you do stop motion? Could you do animation? Do you want to maybe learn a new skill and teach yourself how to use After Effects or something? Like, what is it that you can do and play around with to still make this idea happen, or a version of this idea?
Yeah.
You know,
I like that, a version of this
Yeah.
idea, like a proof of concept, like
exactly.
a pilot rather than a full thing. Just do like 15 minutes of
Exactly.
it, you know. So,
Yeah. I also think it's super important, right, to have these different types of budgets. So you have your ideal, you have your shoestring, and like the one in between. But the ideal is the one that goes out to all the funders. So
Yeah.
in the beginning, I was too low in my ideas, because of course I have 2 international trips, and
Yeah.
I just thought, I don't know. I was like, yeah, I can do it off of like 100,000. And I'm like, no, that's not possible. If I like really was thinking about what the budgets were going to look like. So I slowly learned how to increase my budget, not to like a crazy number, but to what actually fit what it would need to cost for
Yeah.
it. So of course, yes, it's ever changing and continuing to learn how to budget effectively, but I think that was something that was like, okay, actually, like you need to write like what this would actually, if you want it to be the best version of it, like to actually put this number there, and you never know, right? Like we can see if somebody wants to fund it, but
Yeah.
it's possible if you don't even try for that number,
Yeah.
then you're not gonna get it.
And I feel like with documentary though, it is a bit different because it's not like well, I guess depending on how you're filming it, you don't have to hire maybe actors to read lines. And
Right.
So then
right,
you could take
right,
away
right,
some
right.
things.
Totally,
So,
totally.
'cause
But I
yes,
think the edit is where.
Yes.
Where what you don't need in production now you need in the
Yes,
edit.
the editor just takes the entire, like 80% of the budget is towards the editor. So that's the big piece that
that
we
makes
forget.
sense.
We forget post is hefty.
That's where the movie's made, in all honesty.
Right.
Oh, it is.
When you think about
Right.
it, that's really where it's made.
Yep.
So,
I will say, kind of building off of where you said, like, you know, you forget the for documentaries especially, that the post is a big chunk of it. Similarly, when you are planning and budgeting for a short film, really don't forget about all those little things that are easy to forget about.
Yep.
If you have background, are they having purses? Do they have cell phones? Do they have popcorn for this certain scene? If it's a crowd like cheering for a game, do they have posters? That's all it costs. Okay, well now, you know, wardrobe. Or do you want like specific logos on these things? Like there's a film my friend is currently breaking down and budgeting for, and you know, originally the guy's like, yeah, I got $300,000, and she's like, that's great. And then she starts breaking it down. She's like, oh, that's nothing, because the guy, without really realizing it, is writing in specific logos for specific things, and like, you know, his character's a very branded character. That's all costs that you have to think about. You know, like don't forget to, when you are breaking down your script, again, go back to your non-negotiables. Like, what are the props? What's the set dressing? All that little stuff you might not think of. If you can't afford to bring someone on to pass that on to, well, now you have to do that work.
that's very true. Good point. Okay, so how do you balance the creative vision of your short story with the financial realities of producing it in Chicago?
Well, these two questions kind of like blend into each other a little bit. I was thinking that what I didn't do in the past was envision where I wanted the project to be.
That's a good point.
So sometimes, you know, that will factor in budget-wise, right? You can imagine something being on Netflix, or you can imagine it being on Showtime, or do you want to see it at a gallery? There's a wide array of possibilities. So, yeah, but don't like disregard your, you know, your $1 million budget. You know, it's like, well, that's feasible, right? Do you? I like what you said in terms of like having different versions of it. You know, but yeah, where do you want to see it, and where can you imagine seeing it? I think is a big one.
That's all good points. I'm just figuring out which we have 10 minutes left. Okay, so how do you collaborate with other artists or organizations in Chicago to share resources and reduce costs when creating short stories?
Yeah, I'd love to.
I was gonna say,
love to talk
like-
about Mezcla. Yes.
Yeah, please do.
Yes. So a friend and I started this organization back in 2017 to specifically do that work of being able to make sure that we were able to uplift one another as women and non-binary filmmakers of color. And so, yeah, now it's been 5 years and we have over 700 members that are doing cinematography, editing, sound, everything, so that it is so much easier to find one another, to collaborate, and to like learn from each other, to get templates of budgets, or like to get templates of grant application responses, that kind of thing, that people are just so willing to support one another. And so that's been an invaluable resource for so many, including myself too. So yeah, I think that's one of the biggest for me, and I think there's just so many other types of organizations like this in Chicago that are doing similar work for different communities as well, and that it is essential to be in community with one another for us to grow as artists. So yes, like that would be mine.
Wonderful.
I have nothing to add to that. 'Cause, like, Colette, like I just remember when you were building Mezcla, and I was there kind of watching you form it, like build it. And I'm like, this is something that is so needed. And we do have several groups around Chicago, but we forget how important it is to network. And I think Issa Rae said this, you told me network across,
Yep.
not necessarily above.
Yep.
And we kind of forget that. And it's hard too, so you should be proud of yourself. It's hard to keep these things going
Yes.
because like real life gets in the way and then, you know, people drop out. But yeah, it's so important to like network across, to network with your friends, to support other people and just grow together because you don't know how in the future you can rely or lean on somebody
Yep.
and vice versa. And you don't know, I don't want to be like selfishly be like, you don't know where they're also going to end up. But
It's
like,
true.
yeah, you don't know. You have no idea. And you have no idea with these folks that you are supporting and who are supporting you, how you all can come together to build something really beautiful at the end of the day.
I always believe, like, say that filmmaking is about community. So if you don't want to build or network across with the person next to you, you could be chopping your own arm off. You know, I like to think of the Issa Rae model, where I say, what if she looked around and said, I don't want to work with you, you're not on. Like, would there be an awkward black girl? Would there be an insecure? So you have to remember that the people in your community, those are the people that are going to help you go to the next level.
Yep.
So you can't forget about those people.
It's true. I think we can get in with that one. I mean, that covers it. Work across.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Network across.
Network across.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Don't just try to email Tyler Perry or Oprah
Right.
for money. It would be great to get a donation from them. But, don't forget about the mesclas and the IFA and all these. I love that Chicago has so many different organizations for people in the community, for the independent filmmaker, because we see so many of these major TV shows being shot here. They're bringing people from LA to kind of do the work, which kind of cuts out the Chicago people.
Yeah.
So I think it's great that we have each other's back in that way.
And building off of that really quick, like there's nothing that could stop anybody from starting their own mezcla or starting their own
And it's happening.
group of
Totally,
growing. Yeah.
totally.
So it's like if you're gonna network across, think about it too. Like how can you continue to actually keep this as a group and keep it going?
Yes, very true. So I think we have room for like one or two more. So can you discuss any specific? Wait, did I ask this question?
I don't remember the word specific. So.
I don't think I did. Can you discuss any specific challenges or limitations you have faced when creating short stories in Chicago due to budget constraints? I can speak on when we did the Woe Chronicles. A lot of those shots were external. We had one internal location, which was Sam's apartment. We didn't really have much of a budget for locations. Everything was.
We didn't have much of a budget.
Everything was guerrilla shot. We did some shooting in Pilsen. That's the beauty about shooting in Chicago is all of the beautiful and dope external shots that you can get.
I will say, and I don't advocate for this because I don't want anyone going to jail, but there's a lot of people who have turned a blind eye as far as we got shots on the train.
Yep.
And we're not supposed to do that.
Nope.
And, we didn't show any logos or anything, so realistically, how do you actually know, But sometimes you do have to be like, man, assess the risk and be like, I think it's worth it, Get that little bit of adrenaline rush and get that shot, hopefully, again, without getting arrested, that you want. But there's always going to be limitations. And again, it comes back to that creative thinking and kind of surrendering to what the project is and things you have available to you and taking a breath and just figuring out how to make it work.
Yeah. Yeah.
A few years ago, I called the CTA and I'm like, or went to the website or whatever. But I think I remember being on the phone with somebody. And I'm like, yeah, I got this video project. We're shooting a short film. And it came down to this. It's just like, if you don't use a tripod, you can shoot. And it may be listed on the website somewhere, but if you don't use a tripod, feel free.
Wow.
No one knows what you're doing. So.
Interesting.
That's a good point.
And then if you got the $4,000 tripod, leave it at home.
Right. That might draw some attention to you. But it's a good point. A lot of people are willing to help you achieve your goal and kind of give you these little hints. And again, turn a blind eye as long as you're not being disruptive.
That's right.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I never would have thought about that.
It's listed somewhere. They may have changed it. I don't know. But I remember seeing no tripod. And then like maybe I called afterwards. Is this true, sir?
Ask for forgiveness later.
Oh my
But
goodness.
I've been shooting on the train and around the train for years. So now I just go to other cities and shoot on and around the train. Sometimes it seems easier, sometimes it's more difficult.
Yeah.
But it depends on what are you doing. Are you shooting a documentary? Have at it, you know?
Yeah,
So-
yeah. This is the last question on budgeting, is how do you see the funding landscape for Chicago artists creating short stories evolving in the future, and what opportunities or challenges do you anticipate?
I think it's actually getting better. I think that there's a lot more opportunities that are coming out, specifically at like the state and city level, with DCASE having more influx of funding to go towards individual artists, and Illinois Arts Council that they're like the main source of a lot of funding for Mezcla and also for the artists and filmmakers. So that's a big piece, and also around crowdfunding is really interesting too. And I think that, I think there was a peak of like Kickstarter and Indiegogo
Yeah.
campaigns, and it was like super popular. I don't think it's as popular these days, but that there's still ways to find support for projects from like individual fundraising within Chicago that people have been able to tap into. So I also see that there's more funding that is more general operating too, versus like you have to use it for this specific project and that kind of thing. Having more artist grants versus just for a project that allows for the sustainability of our careers as artists. That there's been a lot of push and activism to change the type of funding that's coming out that is helping to sustain our careers. So yes. I think it's on the up and up.
Yeah, that's great.
I would agree with that. I think especially since the pandemic, it has only shown how important the arts are and media is, because especially now that we've proven we can work from home, we've proven how important it is to have stories in general. And I think I'm optimistic to see how it grows, but kind of building off this point of, I don't want to be like, there's money everywhere, but there's some creative and interesting ways that there are ways to get money and to get funding. And
Yeah.
you might not get your like $100 million, but you might be surprised at what you can get, either just by meeting the right people or thinking outside the box, and even just being smart about your budget. Whether it's, I forget who they are, but these guys off of YouTube who made a following, and now they're like, if you donate to our film, we'll let you choose which of 3 ideas we make. But in order to vote on it, you have to like submit $5 or whatever. I'm like, damn, that's genius. And then, or if you're just trying to save money too, when you do get these grants, how can you be creative with maybe not raising the money, but being smart with it? There was somebody told me this, extras are always difficult, because like when you need extras, but you might not have like enough to pay $125 even per person. So instead it's like, what if you get a pool of like a little bit of money, $200, $300, and you get like a TV and you put people in a raffle. So you're like, okay, you're not spending all your budget then, and then you're still getting the extras you need. But that kind of creative thinking, I think, lends itself to also getting more funding, because people see what you're doing,
Yeah.
seeing that you're being smart about what you're doing, and they want to see more from you.
Yeah.
So I agree. I'm very optimistic about the landscape of that.
It's so nice.
I think it's a lot easier to get money nowadays. And then, in terms of scale, where do you imagine seeing your project? How much do you think it's going to cost? I'm a big fan of Magnanimous Video. Shout out to Magnanimous. It's the most economical place to go and rent awesome equipment for cheap. I remember once going in thinking like, oh, well, how much is this again? I was like, really? Well, let me get 2 of those, And then, maybe not, but it's just a matter of the access to technology. As technology keeps changing, you have more ability to be able to pick and choose more than you did in the past.
Yeah.
I would just say that I do think that there's still more funding for documentary than narrative, though. That there's still way more funding opportunities for documentary in Chicago. That it's a much stronger.
I see a lot
funding
of it.
landscape.
I'm like, another documentary.
Right,
Gosh,
right,
like
right,
seriously.
right.
I see it so much.
And like
but
breaking into that like investing equity world
Yeah.
is tough in Chicago for
yeah.
fiction.
I think what's also helped the Chicago market, so there's a lot of shows shot here, and I think because people are seeing the value of Chicago and what it can do, people are wanting to either build studios here, and they're seeing more of like the independent
Yes.
artists, and you're seeing so many of them rise and come out of Chicago.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of Chicago artists that are doing rather well, that they, you know, they might leave, but they leave and they expand.
Yeah. Oh no, I was agreeing with that. I think that's a big point, is that we're seeing a lot of filmmakers, actors, artists, whoever from Chicago, and they're building Chicago up, and people are like, oh, this is a really interesting place. Like, what else does it have? And we're having more opportunities, like, you know, Camera Ambassador, their community builders grant is a great,
Yeah.
you know, for instance of like, this didn't exist a couple of years ago, but now it does. And there's more people who, again, are seeing the value in these stories, seeing the value of investing in younger, and I don't mean younger by like age, but maybe even greener or, you know, unheard voices, untapped voices in the filmmaking community, and supporting that. So definitely more optimistic. But interesting to know about the documentaries. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and also the tax credit. If
I was just gonna
God,
say
yeah.
that
We
tax
cannot
incentive,
forget the
I think
tax
it's
credit.
It's like
Yeah.
25%.
It's pretty.
It is.
solid.
That is
It's
huge.
pretty big.
A
Yeah.
huge benefit if you're able to know how to access it and how to like utilize it. That
Yeah.
you can up your budget like
Tremendously.
significantly.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a game changer too.
It is huge. Caitlin, how much time do I have left? And does that time include questions, or is that after?
You can go as long as you want, but yeah, it's been now.
Okay, so since it's been an hour, I know someone had a question. I think it was you that had.
We can do it formally, but,
Yeah, go ahead and just.
well, I have a bunch of questions, but one question would be, I'm always curious about people's creative process, and when you're working on the genesis of an idea, what are the actual things that you do to build that idea into a story?
Great question.
Just restate it for the
Oh,
online.
that was a question.
What are the first stages in your story process, in your creative process, as you develop the story?
So, what are the first stages of your creative process when creating a story? Did I get that right? Okay.
Yeah, I think that letting go of any expectations is like just setting that as your thing and just being like, all right, whatever I'm about to write is gonna be trash. I like, and that is a-okay.
Leave
you
your
know?
ego out of it, which
Right,
is so
right.
hard.
Because you have to start somewhere.
Right.
So like you just start literally like bullet pointing ideas and start bullet pointing, you know, concepts, and then start fleshing out. Okay, what could this like narration sound like? What could this scene? What could the scene start being? Starting to create the scene list, that kind of thing. So in the documentary space, because we don't know what is going to unfold, even just having an idea of what it could be allows for planning in the production space. So I think that was a big piece. And knowing that it's going to evolve as the film, as you go down this process of production and post, that the story might change 180, which it did for me.
Yep.
And allowing that space to be flexible and adaptable to wherever it might go. So that's another huge piece.
Yeah, I mean, that was.
I was going to say, I really liked when you said let go of expectations. I realized that you can write it. Do not expect it to necessarily look like that when you express it. You know, I've learned that you have to treat your vision for the story as a guide and not as a Bible.
Yeah.
You know, because like I said, you're not necessarily going to get exactly what you want when you execute it. Like I said, I keep thinking about my last project, the Mood Collection, and I had an idea of how I wanted it to look. It came out completely different, but I really did like it. I still was able to keep kind of like the aesthetic to it, but it did not look exactly like how I wanted it to look. So I think letting go of that expectation and, like I said, just treating your vision as a guide will just help you out tremendously.
I think it's interesting to note too, like when we're talking about creative process and like kind of where do you start. I think it also depends on like what am I starting with? Did I have a scene in mind? Did I have a piece of dialogue in mind? Did I know that you know? And it usually starts with like a specific scene. I'm like, where's it gonna go? But I think what always happens for me is I get super excited about an idea, and then I sit down to do the thing, and I freak out because I start judging myself. I start like typing something out and wanting to word vomit and then be like, no, and like editing it as I'm writing it. And so what's been helpful for me is to go back to some techniques that I used to use in art school, which is like, you know, drawing exercises in a sense where and even writing prompt exercises where I have this like vase at home and I have just either a word or a sentence or whatever, and I pull it out and I'm like, okay, you know, it used to be I would have to draw it or I'd write a poem around it or whatever, but now I'm like, okay, can I fit this in the scene? Is that weird? And I just start playing around. I think that's the most important thing, is to remember to play, because if you're not, I'm not saying you're gonna enjoy it 24/7, because it is still work, like you're still like kind of putting yourself down to type something. But you should still play around with that idea, because you have no idea where it's gonna lead. And interestingly enough, even though I'm kind of on the fence of like, this is great, this is horrible, AI has been a really interesting tool when I hit writer's block, because I'll type out keywords for my scene, and whatever AI generates, like I can play around and kind of get it to like, this is what I want the scene to look like. But this was a really interesting thought that this robot came up with.
Wow.
What's there? You know what I mean? And it's kind of again, I like, this is a great idea also, AI. But I think for me, when it comes to a creative process, what really is important is when I hit those roadblocks, how do I move past that? And so it's just playing around more. You know, and even when it comes to budget, again, we can get so stuck on these things of expectations and, you know, how it's supposed to be, and like, oh, I'm afraid to do this and whatever, but you just have to sit down, do it, and just start playing around.
Yeah.
I want to go home and start writing right now. Just based on that. Like, don't be afraid. It's okay. It's going to be trash. But do it, you know? Because that's hardcore. I mean, I have that spirit right now, just like listening to you. Like, you get inspired, but then you can't listen to that little person in your head.
Yes.
Right.
Oh, God, that's that little evil.
Why are you even trying?
Why does this person talk to me? But
Yes.
I started during the pandemic, listening to like audio tapes of people that talked about like not listening to your evil self. and things like
Yeah.
that. I realized I needed like a lot of confidence in order to complete projects. And then I guess you can't tell that to everybody, but it works. So there was this lady who used to talk to Oprah, and her name was, I'm gonna forget right now, but we talk later, you know, come up or whatever. But she does like a lot of something what she calls mirror work, where you look in the mirror and you talk. Louise Hayes. Her name.
Oh, yeah, I like her.
Louise Hayes is the bomb. you
Yes,
know,
she
Louise Hayes
is.
the bomb. And you know, I share it with everybody now. But do I do it on my own? You know, that's the thing. Like, I need to look in the mirror all the time and give myself confidence
Yeah.
boosters. Like, look, you got this. Just start writing. See what happens. You got to get it done anyway. You know? It's not gonna make itself. That's what I always come back to. It's not gonna make itself.
Right.
So yeah, you know, turn on that ambient music, some experimental jazz, and then you know
Yeah.
you go for it. My kid's mom was in a PhD program, and the instructor told her while she was coming up with a dissertation to just drink like a potent concoction, to loosen up and just start writing.
Yeah.
I don't know, it was cognac or something, I guess it was. Just like, get yourself some cognac, and you just get to it. Now, he had a gold tooth. I was just like, I would have loved to see it in that class.
Character
So I was just
himself.
like,
Oh my
yeah, wrote himself in, yeah. I was just like, wow, you had a professor with a gold tooth? That's awesome. So,
Funny.
Cognac.
I was gonna say too, we talked about that inner voice. Is what if you put it in your script?
Yeah.
What if you allowed that? You have your angel, you have your demon. What if you gave that demon a stage? What if you put them in there to silence them? That's at times the best way to minimize it is to face it.
Yes.
Is why not just write it in your
Yes.
work? Make it a person.
That's part of you too.
Yeah.
Make it that's your shadow self.
Yep.
Make friends with it.
Yeah.
Amen.
know?
That's awesome.
That's deep.
Yeah. I was gonna say something else and I just forgot. Any more questions? Sure.
What are your influences, and like, do you borrow anything from them, like when you make movies? Like, who are you influenced by?
So what are your influences and do you borrow from any ideas when you make them?
Yeah.
Correct. Okay.
Yeah, God, that's really good, because I'm the worst with names, but a lot of the influences, and not that I don't look to filmmakers, I do, but a lot of the times the influences come from artists, or like, I find it fascinating that someone can say so much with just very little, whether it's a
Yeah.
photograph, a sculpture, painting. I find that fascinating. So for me, that almost, again, not that I'm not influenced by directors, but especially coming from like a short film or DIY standpoint, these folks who have made so much with so little is
Yeah.
really inspiring to me. You know, like I love Tim Walker, who's a fashion photographer, and he does these very whimsical photo shoots. And sometimes he does videos too, and he's written books and stuff. But he, even though he's like in the big leagues now, he takes these like seemingly everyday objects and makes these very whimsical stories in them. And so what starts is influences is it's not even necessarily like I'm going to recreate this shot for shot in this short film, but I'm going to play around with that shot and see how close I can get and see where it leads me elsewhere. You know, because then you end up finding something else completely different and being like, oh wait, this is kind of a signature little thing that I like doing, and like how can I bring more of that into it? You know, I will say though, some of my influences in terms of writing have been like Edgar Wright or Wes Anderson, because their scripts are really, I've really enjoyed the way that they've almost written them like novels. Because there's some scripts you read and they're kind of hard to get through, and I'm like, I can't imagine anything's going on. I get that this is a blueprint for like someone else, but I really appreciate the film auteurs, you know, and even Tarantino, who really take the time to write the script that they know they're going to direct, but they make it an enjoyable read too. And I think that's inspiring, because it's like it kind of makes you want to keep moving. It's not just a job that you're doing. It's like, no, this is a story. It's a reminder of a story that we're telling.
It's huge. Yeah, I love that, and I agree with like, you know, these other types of mediums that are just like, wow, how you were able to like use this symbol to like give so much depth and meaning is incredible. I have definitely been on a personal doc, like just watching as many personal docs as possible to see how other people are crafting their stories, and that's been super illuminating for my own path. Also, I am planning to use animation within my film too, so like looking at other animation styles and watching different types of animations. And then the other thing is actually looking in the fiction space too, for storytelling structures and how to create this hero's journeys arc in mainstream media too. So that's been also very helpful in creating a narration arc in post-production, is going to fiction too.
Nice.
Yeah, same. I've been really investigating fiction that I've missed out on in the past. I'm currently reading all of Toni Morrison's books in order. I just made it to the third one. I mean, it's a huge leap from Sula to Song of Solomon, you know. But you know, you learn along the way. It's just like flipping through those pages, like, oh wow, so this is a complex story. Let me stay away from this level of complexity, and let me wrestle with 2 or 3 characters, you know. Yeah, but I used to write down who my influences were sometimes, because I'd always forget people's names. Then it started to become like a mantra. And just now I had to go through the mantra, like, damn, what's that guy's name again? I was thinking about tattooing this artist's name on me, which would be really weird. But I don't have any tattoos yet. I was just like, well, maybe I should just start with this guy. But then if I ever meet him, it's going to be weird or whatever. I'm just like, oh, I got your name tattooed on me. I don't know. Maybe he would like that. He used to be married to a soap opera star. I'm going to leave it alone from there. But anyway, so, I mean, yeah. I'm really interested in this documentary by a guy named Jim Cohen. Amazing. Late night on Netflix, and then it like magically disappeared. It's like it had like a limited run. And then I went on like this whole like tangent of trying to find out about him, and then finding out about the rest of his work, you know, seeing if I could like really get into it. But yeah, I mean, you know, start with fiction. It's a beautiful place. Start with the images in your head. And then look at photographs. I take a lot of screenshots. So then I put screenshots in folders and things like that. Sometimes they just sit there for a billion years. Other times you're just like, oh, I got a picture of that somewhere, you know. Let's get that motivated.
I have that too. There's certain things around Chicago I'll take photos of, because I like the texture, I like just the way that it looks, and I'm like, I don't know when I'm going to use this, but there's something there. So sometimes like an influence isn't even like someone well known. Sometimes it's just like the city that you're in, you know. I will say if you ever need, it's not so much again an influence of like I'm inspired by this person's work and I'm gonna recreate this shot in my film. But if you ever need a jolt of energy to inspire you to continue making films in general, there's this documentary called Raiders, the greatest fan film ever made. And if you've ever seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, like, there's a lot going on in that movie. But there's 3 young boys who decided to recreate, I think there were 12, recreate the entire movie shot for shot. And it took them until they were 40 to recreate it. And it's because they would do certain scenes at certain ages.
Oh
So
my
like at one point
gosh.
they're like 12 years old, like, you know, talking to Marion and taking a drink, and then the next scene, which is supposed to be sequential, is them 40 years old, like, and it's wild. And you sit there and you're like, not only is this an enjoyable movie, but it is like, makes me jazzed. I can do anything. If these 12-year-old kids did this, like, it's crazy. It's an incredible, like, just really fun, enjoyable movie. So that's also, as far as influences go, sometimes it's like, what are other people doing that, like, makes you want to continue doing this?
Yeah.
So we've been,
For me, I would say I love photography. Like, it's something about I love going to the Art Institute, and I love just looking at a picture and maybe without reading the description, what is this, like, what was the story behind this? And then I might even create a story in my head, because it's like you have so much information. You have their facial expressions, you have the background, you have the colors, you have the lighting. It's something about looking at pictures that really inspires me. Lately, I've also been into color and sound and mood, you know, and then figuring out how that makes me feel, that also inspires me. So it's just really finding inspiration everywhere. I'm never short of feeling inspired by stuff in music. Music is like one of the biggest things. Like, I was recently watching Kendrick Lamar's, I love watching him live, and he did a show in Paris. It was from his last album, and it was just so much fun to watch. And I just kept getting all these different stories while he was going through the timeline of all his music, and it was just fun to listen to. And I just felt like a story. Like, I just felt like a story. Or I felt like a story kind of brewing in my mind watching it. So I'm inspired by everything, but mainly music. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I think, Caitlin? Are there any more questions before I call Caitlin again? Okay. Caitlin?
You can say goodbye.
Well, thank y'all so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. Thank you to all of our online viewers and our people in-house. And thank you to all of the wonderful panelists, Chris,
Thank you.
Colette,
Great
Sam.
moderation.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
Thank
Crystal.
you.
Fantastic.
Bye, y'all. Online.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, I think that's it.
Yeah.